And welcome back for the final day of our conference looking at cultural diplomacy and the United Nations. I'm happy once again that we can be hosted by the Embassy of Bulgaria. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And we're going to begin today with a keynote address on really one of the most important issues, in my opinion, when one talks actually about the future of cultural diplomacy and how one really can make a sustainable impact in terms of educating, enhancing, and also sustaining relationships, namely the issue of education. I'm really happy actually for the second time to have the pleasure introducing Dr. Eduardo Ochoa, who is currently the Assistant Secretary for Postsecondary Education for the United States government. Dr. Ochoa was named to his current position by President Obama in 2010 and serves as the Secretary's Chief Advisor on higher education issues. Dr. Ochoa administers more than 60 programs designed to provide financial assistance to eligible students enrolled in post-secondary institutions. Prior to his current position, Dr. Ochoa served as the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Sonoma State University, part of the California State University system. He has also worked as an assistant and associate engineer in New York, as Dean of the School of Business and Economics at Cal State Los Angeles, and Dean of Cal Poly Sonoma College of Business Administration. Dr. Ochoa has a bachelor's degree from Reed College, a master's degree from Columbia University in New York, and a PhD in economics from the New School of Social Research. If you could please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Dr. Eduardo Ochoa. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this international conference on cultural diplomacy. I've been looking over the agenda for your conference, and I realize I'm not going to be touching on the core issues that are addressed by many of the other speakers, but instead I'm going to give you some background on the education agenda of the Obama administration, where the United States is at this point on this issue, and then draw some implications for cultural diplomacy that flow out of our education agenda and where we see the needs of the United States in the 21st century. So basically, the president has recognized that in this global information society, in order for nations to remain globally competitive and to have a prosperous economy, and as well for the reasons that are, a longer standing and traditional part of the mission of education, in order to have a healthy, vibrant democracy, you need to have an educated citizenry. And the level of that education is constantly rising. That's necessary for that to happen. So the president challenged the country with a very ambitious goal, education goal for the year 2020, which is for the United States to actually increase the proportion of college graduates from 40 to 60%, and to once again be among the most educated countries in the world. So this is really the North Star of the Department of Education. It kind of frames and focuses everything that we do. Now, in order to understand what we do, we also need to understand how education is structured in the United States. Unlike many other countries, we don't have a Ministry of Education. We're constantly reminded of that by higher education leaders and politicians. We are a Department of Education, and we are there to support and assist and facilitate the education objectives of the country. But fundamentally, education is a local and state responsibility to the extent that it's carried out by the public sector. And there's, of course, a very healthy and vibrant private sector, both nonprofit and now for-profit. So the traditional focus of the Department of Education has been K-12, or now P-12. And that's, of course, continues to loom large, and it's really where the larger numbers of students as well as instructors, teachers are. So it makes sense for that to happen. But in this age, and given the president's 2020 goal, it's become much more important to focus on college completion. In fact, we have kind of a slogan, which is, we've had a slogan until recently, which has been access, quality, and completion. in terms of higher education. More recently, the slogan has been modified because we recognize that completion presupposes access, so that's already contained there. But a third objective now has taken its place in the slogan, and that's affordability. Because as we greatly expand the numbers, the need to have college graduates and other post-secondary credentials for our people, it's becoming also more and more expensive, and higher education has, in some ways, is like healthcare. In fact, a lot of its cost structure is driven by healthcare, but also like the healthcare industry, there hasn't been a dynamic of continuous productivity improvement in this sector. Rather, improvements in quality typically are about adding more features, adding more complexity and sophistication to what we do, but not necessarily watching what that does to costs. And that's the same as in healthcare. The progress and innovation in healthcare typically leads to higher costs because there are more services being provided rather than more efficient ways of doing things. So one of the challenges now for this sector is how to create transform the culture of education, and particularly higher education, I'm thinking, so that continuous productivity improvement, properly understood to mean both quality and efficiency, can start to be built into the DNA of our institutions. That's a big challenge. For the time being, the three priorities for this coming year of 2013 for the administration are, one of them is college costs. The other one is raising up the teaching profession in the P-12 arena, because we still have a problem with quality. The United States has arguably the finest higher education system in the world, particularly if you look at its elite institutions. But our K-12 system is short of where we'd like it to be. And we have too many students. Once you get away from the top elite schools and you look at the schools, the public state universities that serve the greater percentage of our students, like the one I worked in, you find that as much as 60% of the students coming in are not ready for college work, need remediation. So that's a reflection on what's happening in K-12. So there's a big focus. The second big priority is to strengthen the teaching profession. And this was done in the first couple of years of the administration. There was a couple of signature programs in the K-12 area, one called Race to the Top, the other one Investing in Innovation, which were Race to the Top focused on leveraging federal competitive grants to states to trigger and stimulate statewide reform of schools. One of the unintended, perhaps, consequences of this focus was that we did not pay enough explicit attention and recognition to the need to support teachers. And so by implication, in the absence of that being very explicit, the impression was created that teachers were being blamed for what was happening. We recognize that teachers are very dedicated individuals who don't go into that profession to make a lot of money, that's clear. But because they love teaching and they love imparting knowledge and education to their students, but they need to be supported. They need professional development, they need to be well-trained, and that's where I think we need, and they also need to be compensated in a dignified fashion. So those are the things that we're focusing on in terms of the teaching profession for the coming year. The third big priority is jobs. And clearly the recession that we're just beginning to come out of in the United States was the worst one since the Great Depression. There is let me just editorialize here as an economist. There seems to be a great deal of confusion among the public and our politicians about why that happened and how, what the impact was of government action. Clearly, anybody who's studied economics knows that we had a very dangerous situation with the real estate bubble collapse spreading to endangering the financial system. So it was necessary to ensure that the financial system wouldn't collapse because that would spread to the whole economy. It was also necessary to stimulate aggregate demand, and that's what the stimulus package was. Some of the characterizations of that stimulus package as having failed because the rate of unemployment is as high as it has been seems to miss the boat. Without that package, the rate would have been that much higher. But it's hard to demonstrate that because you don't run controlled experiments on the economy. Anyway, off the soapbox. Now, on the higher education area, that this is now coming into sharp focus, particularly because there's been a rising concern about the cost of college, both in the private and the public sector in the United States, and the level of indebtedness that students are incurring to go to college. And this is due to several factors. One is that there's the public higher education sector, which is the bulk of it. It really educates about 80% of all post-secondary students. And then there's the private sector, which is about 20% of the students, lots of small institutions and some flagship institutions. And so there tends to be a focus in Washington on the elite private universities because most of our policymakers and politicians have gone to those institutions, so they tend to generalize from that basis to the whole system. And in that sector, there is a particular dynamic driving up costs, which is basically a kind of an arms race among institutions to move up the rankings, to increase the prestige of the institution, which means for most of them that they have to attract the most selective student body possible. So they provide all sorts of amenities, and they also provide merit-based aid to upgrade the quality of their applicant pool. And then once they get a big fat applicant pool, they can be highly selective of that pool, and that selectivity ratio is one of the key indexes in the U.S. News and World Report rankings. So there's a whole game going on about how to move up in the rankings of the U.S. News. The focus on those rankings means that people are desperate to get in the top 10 or 20 institutions, and money is no object. And so those institutions are, in the market, they are what economists call a superior good, which is a good, the demand for which rises the higher the price. And so, so that's one dynamic at work in a small but highly visible and important sector of higher education. And the public sector is a much different dynamic. And that, what's happening there is that the states, who have been the major source of support for public institutions subsidizing state university tuitions, are facing severe fiscal challenges of their own because of the steep recession that we've gone through, and also because of some longer-term structural problems, chiefly among them healthcare and benefits, and partly because of the dynamic of state legislatures, which tend to, in order to curry favor with stakeholders that can impact their ability to get reelected, are willing to grant, fairly generous benefit packages that are going to sort of hit the books, years down the line. So those two things combined have created a problem. And then on top of that, of course, and coming from California, I'm painfully aware of this, we have been deferring the impact of a movement that started back in the 70s with Prop 13, which actually cut the tax base of state government severely there, and has left the state of California with a structural imbalance between revenues and expenditures. And that movement has spread across the country too, to many other states. And so we have a situation now where you can say generally across the country there is a disconnect between what the public would like to see in the way of provision of services by state governments and federal government, and what they're willing to pay in taxes. So that's a problem. So that's the and so the public institutions then faced with that, the states have to, they have basically too much of a demand on the limited revenues that they have, and so they have to cut where they can cut. And for a lot of, there are a lot of mandates from the federal government itself. In fact, that's to support Medicare, payments and so forth. The states have to match those, and so they can't cut those without losing a lot more resources. They've got benefit obligations. They've got, the services that they are committed to providing, and then there's higher education, and there's K-12, of course. That's a big element too. So, of all of those constituents, I'll give you the example of California. In some ways, higher education is somewhat orphaned in California because the Democrats, while they're very sympathetic to public education, they're even more sympathetic to people who are, blind, disabled, that need, really critical services. And so when it comes, when that's the choice, that education takes a back seat. And the Republicans, on the other hand, are just, they want to shrink the size of government across the board. So neither party really has embraced higher education in California as a first priority. And on top of that, they know that, well, those institutions can raise tuition. They have the ability to find that other source of revenue. So that's been happening. And the federal government has stepped into this because of the ambitious but essential, I think, objective of raising the educational level of the population. Federal government has greatly expanded direct federal student aid to students. First, by increasing the maximum Pell Grant that students can qualify for to $5,635 a year. In the coming year, 2013, in the proposed budget, the President has allocated $36 billion to fully fund the demand for Pell Grants by students. We also have a very large program of direct student lending, direct student loans. In fact, student loans used to be a big chunk of student loans were being offered by banks and guaranteed by the federal government. And there was actually, in effect, a subsidy to those loans by the government. And one of the things that happened in this administration is that there has been a transition away from that, and now we have switched to 100% direct student lending. The government no longer subsidizes privately offered loans. So we have saved about $8 billion just by making that transition, and over 10 years it'll be $80 billion we expect that will be saved. So that has allowed us to greatly expand student lending. So, but because of that, because on the one hand the government is supporting with grants and student lending, and on the other hand the state government is withdrawing support from the institutions and they're raising their tuition, we have a transition here from supporting the institutions at the state level to supporting the students at the federal level. But because Pell Grants only go so far and the rest of it is made up by loans, it has led to rising indebtedness by students. And so now it's become critical to ensure that the students are attending institutions that are offering quality education, and that education can lead to to work that will pay at least well enough so that students are able to meet their debt obligation. From our perspective, that's one concern. But more generally, obviously, the country's making this investment. Students are making investment of their time and their future, and we want to make sure that they're getting a quality education that leads to a full career, a valuable career. So those are some of the issues that we're dealing with. There's a lot more here I can tell you about some of the programs that we're proposing for the coming year to try to deal with this situation, this dynamic at the state level. I'll just tell you very briefly. We're proposing to do something that we are calling Race to the Top, College Affordability and Completion, which is analogous to what's been done in K-12, in that it's going to be targeted at states. It's going to be a competitive grant program targeted at states and contingent on the states making certain commitments. Commitments to reforming higher education in terms of how well the students coming out of high school dovetail with the needs for, to be college ready, working better, having better transfer and articulation agreements among institutions, and also a commitment to stabilizing tuition, and a commitment on the part of the states to maintain a reasonable level of support for public higher education. So, we're hoping that this will start changing that negative dynamic for public higher education. We also are a couple of other programs that are going to be reinforcing this. We have currently about $10 billion that we're proposing in campus-based aid, these are loans that are federally financed but are assigned to institutions for them to distribute as they see fit, and we're going to tie those to the kinds of outcomes that the awards for that for different colleges are going to be tied to how effectively they are enrolling and graduating low-income students and restraining tuition and fees and demonstrating positive educational and employment outcomes. So that's something else we're doing. And then we have a program that's, I mentioned that in K-12 we had Race to the Top. We also had another program in K-12 we still have it, called Investing in Innovation, which basically is looking for innovation by individual schools and organizations to really foster new ways of teaching and learning, ways of taking advantage of technology that are innovative and so forth. And so we have a program like that for higher education called First in the World, which is being initially funded at a modest level of $55 million, but I think we'll be able to demonstrate the impact that can have and then hopefully grow it in years to come. So that's what we're doing on higher education in the coming budget. Now, how does this connect to the topic of this conference? Well, the connection is through the quality sort of category. In the department, we have begun to really focus on articulating what a quality education has to include for our students and for the president's goal to be meaningful. If we're going to have that many more college graduates, it's not just about a piece of paper, it's about what that degree represents in terms of their abilities, their knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we have been working in the department on developing an international strategy that looks across everything we do to see how we can foster and international global competencies for our students. That's really what we're looking for. And so we have there's a largely self-selected group of advocates within the department for international education and for foreign language instruction that has articulated the case for it, the rationale for it, how it ties into the president's goal and the ultimate purpose of that goal, which is global competitiveness. And so if the United States is going to be a globally competitive country, it has to be able to communicate well, understand other cultures, be effective in those interactions, and promote mutually beneficial, exchanges, both commercial and cultural. So that's where the connection comes in, and we are working on that, and we have had long-standing programs in this area. So I'm here with my Deputy Assistant Secretary for International and Foreign Language Education, Andre Lewis, who oversees those programs. Those programs have, we did have a tough budget year last year, so those programs were cut rather substantially, but we are now refocusing them. One of the things that we were in the process of doing when the cuts came, we were overtaken by the cuts, was we were trying to realign the existing programs that we had so they would more directly support the President's 2020 goal and the underlying rationale for that goal. So we wanted our programs, for example, to reach a broader spectrum of students and institutions, so it could have a larger impact. The primary focus and emphasis in the past for our international programs was to support a limited number of centers of excellence in our higher education system that would provide, for example, critical rare languages that would have strategic significance for the United States. It was about sort of narrow but deep expertise. Now the focus is, since global competencies is now part of the core educational outcomes that we want all of our students to achieve, we have to spread it much wider. And so we have to focus on a broader array of institutions. We have to start looking at our funding, since it is limited, to start moving gradually away from this source of continuing funding for these centers and institutions, and more as startup money, seed money, to get programs going, so the money can be turned over and continually cycle through a growing number of institutions. So the impact of this funding can be leveraged, just like we're doing with Race to the Top monies and other monies in the education arena. We want the money to act as a lever to drive institutional change and realignment of resources at the state and individual institutional level. So that's what we are doing. Now the strategy that I mentioned to you, it's basically, the two goals are very straightforward and very broad. One is strengthening U.S. education through international and foreign language instruction, and the promoting of global competencies in our students. And the other one is advance U.S. international priorities. We still have a need for, an important need to understand other cultures, and there may be some particular targeted needs, for example, that our State Department identifies that we need to understand in particular. This set of countries right now, it's critical that we have a critical mass of people that can make sense of what's going on there and can effectively interact with them. So we support that too. We support the overall objectives of the government. So the objectives to advance those two goals that we've identified are to integrate the international dimension of education across the Department of Education and to strengthen internal coordination of all of our international activities. We're going to focus national attention on the importance of a world-class education and international engagement for the 21st century. So that's the famous bully pulpit, which works. It really does work. So just simply talking about it, drawing attention to it, can stimulate action and facilitate coordination of efforts across the country. We want to also increase opportunities for U.S. students to acquire global competencies, as I've been saying. We want to utilize also international benchmarking and targeted research to inform U.S. education policy and practice. It's clear that we have as much to learn from other countries as they do from us. There are, in the K-12 area, for example, there's been a sustained look at a group of countries that are achieving consistently better outcomes in the K-12 area. And so we want to understand how they do it, particularly how they prepare their teachers, how their work is organized, et cetera. So that kind of research goes on. We also cooperate with the OECD and UNESCO on those kinds of international benchmarking and collecting of international statistics, understanding better the trends, and so forth. And finally, we want to engage in active and strategic education diplomacy, which is sort of the cultural diplomacy theme of this conference. I think that as we engage with other countries and exchange information about how what their educational practices are, how the things that work for them and the ones that work for us, we're creating goodwill, we're building relationships, we're creating a foundation of trust and understanding that can have broader benefits across the relationship between the countries. So and for the International and Foreign Language Education Unit, basically their strategy flows directly out of this department-wide strategy. So first of all, they, like everybody else in the department, keeps the 2020 goal foremost in their minds and thinks about how can we make our contribution in this or that program to supporting their goal. We also understand that there are, and we take direction on this from the State Department, there are national security and priorities that are involved in international education and in global competitiveness. But we also want to improve, another goal that's very explicit is to improve access and diversity in international education in the United States. So we want to, and one of the ways to do that, because it is, I think, where you get the most impact, is to increase international education opportunities for U.S. underrepresented students and for faculty. Getting faculty abroad is very important. That can really help. We already have in many of our schools a highly diverse student body. But if our faculty haven't had international experiences, they may be unaware of the hidden potential within their own classrooms. So broadening their perspectives on that can then be the lever to start capitalizing on the diversity in the classrooms. We're also going to focus on program evaluation and assessment, so we are able to demonstrate with evidence the impact that our programs are having. And when they're not having the impact we want, to reform them so that they do. This is it sounds obvious, but that has not been the way traditionally programs have been created and administered. Usually, a program is created by Congress. There may be a senator or a congressman or woman who feels that this is an important thing, we should have it. They get it in legislation. The program is put in place. We fund it. We manage it. We make sure that the grantees comply with all of the regulations, but we don't necessarily look for, is it working? Is it actually achieving what the original idea was? So we're starting to do more of that. And then finally, we're also going to focus on specific countries that we think deserve increased attention and engagement by the United States, in particular Brazil, India, China, and Indonesia, where I think our engagement needs to grow. I think I've talked long enough, right? I'll stop now and open it up for questions. Thank you.